and on YouTube worldwide. Hello, I'm John Ricciutti, and my co-host is Jill Frechie. Good morning, Jill.
Good morning, John.
Our extraordinary person of interest today is a retired attorney, law professor, and now author Jack Dobbyn. Jack is the author of a collection of books starting with Neon Dragon. That may not have been his first one, but I'll let him clear that up. Frame Up, Black Diamonds, Deadly Diamonds, Fatal Odds, and I think there's a newest book, but I'll let Jack explain that. Good morning.
We'll
Jack.
talk about. Good morning, Johnny. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Thank you for the invitation. It's delightful to be here. I love your station, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. We thought you would be an interesting guest for a number of reasons. One, you're a law professor at Villanova University for how long?
47 years.
Okay,
47 wonderful years. This is the greatest home in the world for a professor.
Is it really?
Oh, it is. Oh, no question about it.
You didn't start out as a law professor. You're a New England guy.
No.
I knew right away from the accent.
No, I lost the accent, John.
Did you lose it?
I thought I lost it until people, every once in a while, a student would come up and say, "What part of Boston are you from?" How did you know?
We're how did I know?
No, how did the student, anybody, every once in a while, somebody will pick it up and surprise me because I thought I'd lost
my
it.
father was a Rhode Islander.
Oh, really?
So, yeah,
There's a distinct accent.
Very.
Yeah.
Very, and I think it's intentional.
Yeah, could be.
You're from Mass?
From Boston, Massachusetts, right?
Boston.
Both my wife and I both born in Boston,
So,
Massachusetts.
A Southie or no?
No, we lived in the western part of Boston, a town called West Roxbury.
And you went to Boys Latin?
I went to Boston Latin School, which, if I may throw in a plug, it's the oldest school in the country. 1635 it was established, 1 year before Harvard. And then Harvard was established to take our graduates and continue them on. And ever since 1635, Boston Latin School has been the major feeder of applicants to Harvard University. We sent, I think it was 37 students to Harvard this year, more than any other, and it's a private school. Excuse me, it's a public school, not private. It is terribly heavily funded by graduates who just think the world of terribly rigid classical education. And well, anyway, somewhat sounds like I'm asking you to join.
Was your family educated?
Yeah, my dad went to Boston Latin School, and then he taught at Boston Latin School for, I think it was 37 years. Yeah. He was a math teacher there for many years.
So that's
runs in the family.
So that was the legacy was that you continued.
You bet. You bet.
And then you went to
happily so.
Then went to where?
Well, and then went to Harvard.
Because it was
Harvard
like,
College.
It was like a seamless transition then.
It really was. I almost didn't. Can I tell you a quick story?
You're a great Irish storyteller. I
almost didn't go to any college because of all of the people in this world who have taken the SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Test, to get into college. Mine would be the lowest possible score ever on that test. And I'll tell you what happened. I took the test and the score came back and it was something below zero. I just did terribly on it. But we had a man at Boston Latin School. He was theoretically the librarian. Lee Dunn was his name. Lee took a personal interest in every one of our graduates. And he took a look at my score and said, that's not right. So he went to the SAT people and he said, I want to see his actual exam. And it was those days when you'd fill in the little dots with, for the right answer. So he put the key over it, and sure enough, it was terrible. But if you move it down one, I got them all. In other words, I had missed one, and then all of the rest would be wrong.
Oh.
I'd never have known it if Lee hadn't gone through that. So he found out what happened, went to the Harvard admissions committee, and they said, here's his admission. I'd never have done it otherwise.
And you wouldn't have gone to school.
Probably be, a plumber making a lot more money. Right.
I think you would today.
Right. You know that personally.
Yes, I do. I'm not a plumber though.
No, but you use them.
Yeah. Yes. So then after Harvard, you went to law school?
No, after Harvard, I went into the Air Force for 3 years, 3 wonderful years in the Air Force.
Where were you stationed?
I was stationed I was in the Air Defense Command, And we had, they gave each one of our units about 150 miles of the border of the United States. And there's another one up in the Dew Line. So I was stationed at a base that had about 150-mile area to protect against incoming aircraft. And clearly we were looking for Russian bombers coming over the line, over the top of the world. And I did that for 3. What would happen is if there were an unknown aircraft coming in, and I'm not giving away any secrets, I would see it on my radar scope, and we would scramble an F-89 or F-104, and I could see on my radar scope the incoming aircraft, see the jet fighter that's taken off, and now I would give directions to run an intercept between the two, and they would my pilot would identify, if possible, and say, "Oh, it's just a harmless plane that didn't file a flight plan or whatever." And if it were dangerous, if it were an incoming bomber, thank God it never was, I could give the order to shoot it down, which is a lot of power to give to a second lieutenant.
Yeah, well, that's who you give those orders. Those, that's who gets to do those things.
It seems as if.
Because the higher up it goes, the less likely you're going to get a response.
That's right.
They're too worried about their career.
That's right, true. That's right. But it was because of that I actually went into the law.
What years was that?
That would have been, let's see, I graduated from Harvard in 1959, and if it was from 59 to 62, and then 3 weeks before I got out, I had no idea whatsoever what I was going to do.
So you were just like right before Vietnam.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, right in that niche. That's right. As a matter of fact, Vietnam was just beginning, because I can remember fellows that I was with talking about the decision of John Kennedy to, get us committed in Vietnam. That was the beginning of it. And then, of course, he was killed, and then it went on to others.
And it was escalated.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Then President Johnson took over, and then it became scary.
Lyndon Johnson told the nation, "There's no need for escalation."
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't true.
Oh, boy.
Having interviewed you, Jill and I interviewed you at the past at Radnor Studio 21, and and you mentioned his name, John Kennedy.
Yeah.
Your family has some connection to Kennedy.
We did. My uncle was one of the greatest guys in the world. If I can jump ahead and come back,
That's the purpose.
Oh, okay.
You can go all over.
Oh, well, that's neat, John. Thank you for the freedom. I've written now 7 novels. When I get into novel writing, that became my life. So I've got 7 novels out and working on the 8th one right now. But I had to have series characters, and one of the characters was an old, crusty old man by the name of Lex Devlin, who's one of the attorneys. Anyway, he is based upon. It's the only character I've ever used full-blown out of real life, and that was based on my Uncle Dick. My Uncle Dick went to Boston Latin School, and with Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy was his classmate.
The father.
The Papa Joe. So when Uncle Dick graduated, and he never went to college, Joe went to Harvard, but my uncle never did. But he remembered my uncle, and it was Depression times. You couldn't find a job anywhere. But Uncle Dick had done Joe a favor, and
What favor did he do?
I hesitate to say. It had to do with the taking of an exam to get into Harvard.
Is that right?
Yeah, but we won't go into that because that's just
you
family
can't go
lore.
into it?
Well,
Is
it's
there
family
any?
lore, and I'm not sure whether it's urban legend or truthful.
So I'm getting a nod that somebody says it's the truth.
Yeah, I know.
So,
One of Lois's favorite stories.
Jack's wife Lois is here.
Oh my gosh! So if they sue us,
he took a test.
So anyway,
I like
quite
dirt.
possibly. The allegation, allegedly, that'll get you through anything, won't it?
Yeah.
Allegedly that happened. So
He
when
took the entrance exam for Joe Kennedy.
There's that family legend anyway.
Okay.
John.
Okay. I won't.
That's as far as I'm going to go with that one.
Okay.
But anyway, so it's Depression times. Joe remembers I won't say it, what Uncle Dick allegedly did for him. So he contacted my Uncle Dick and he said, "Hey, Dick, I'm buying a chain of movie theaters through Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. I want you to run them. I want you to come in and run them." Gave him a job for the rest of his time. Well, then the time came when the older son, of course, passed away, but
The one
time
was
to
killed-
run,
the
time to
one
get
was
into
killed-
politics.
The one Joe that was killed in the World War II?
It was, exactly.
Okay.
But now it's time for the road up for the Irish was through politics. One of the clear roads was through politics.
Massachusetts?
In Boston in particular, you bet. And Irish politics, as a matter of fact. So Joe came to my Uncle Dick and said, "Hey, Jack is going to run. It's time. He's going to run for representative, House of Representatives." He said, "I want to know from you, because you're an expert in math and numbers and cash, how much do I have to spend to get him elected?" And my uncle said, "Joe, you don't have to spend a dime. There's nobody that can beat Jack in that election with your name." He said, "Good. I'm going to spend $1 million anyway." And he did. And Jack, of course, was elected to the House of Representatives. And he made my uncle the financial manager for the campaign. And he was with Jack Kennedy for that through the senatorship election twice. And then finally, he was the financial manager during the presidential campaign. So it was a wonderful relationship.
Did you have a relationship with Jack Kennedy? Or
I
no?
didn't.
Or
I
your
didn't.
father?
I'm thinking back, I never met him. But I can remember going to my Uncle Dick's house on Christmas Eve. Every Christmas Eve, we went to Uncle Dick's house. And at a certain time, probably about 10 o'clock at night, the phone would ring. And my uncle would get up slowly and kind of walk across the room, knowing who it was. And it would be Joe Kennedy. And Joe would be calling to wish the family a Merry Christmas and, send them a beautiful gift usually. But that relationship.
Your wife's laughing again.
Yeah.
We should be interviewing Lois.
I know, you'll get more truth. But but anyway, that led to a wonderful relationship for all those many years. Can I tell you a funny story?
Please do.
Okay.
That's why you're here.
I love this
The
story.
more you talk, the less I have to work.
Oh, well, relax. Sit
Or
back.
or the less Joe has to work.
I wish I could get you a cup of coffee. Lois and I went up to Boston to visit recently. Now we know Boston inside out, but
As reflected in your books.
oh well, thank you. But we took the duck tour. You know what the duck tour is?
Yeah,
Okay, the duck tour is that thing that
But
you
you can
ride on.
explain it.
Well,
You can explain it.
it's like a bus, but it's amphibious. In other words, they can drive onto the Charles River, and
Wait,
so
when did
on.
you do this? How long ago?
Oh golly, what was it? About 10 years, I think.
Oh,
About 10
because
years
remember
ago.
the big duck tour sank in
It
Philadelphia.
did. You're right.
So
That's
I'm not
right.
sure I would recommend it now.
That was a problem.
Yeah. It went out
Anyway.
of business, but I'm glad you made it back.
Oh, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
so
you. Well, we
throw
can
that in
swim.
there.
This driver had an excellent sense of humor, and he told a story. He said, "This story is true." He said, "There was a fella came over from Ireland." Now, this is the time when there was a flood of people coming over from Ireland, and when they arrived at Boston looking for work, they'd go to a business or store or whatever looking for a job, and there would be an NINA sign in the window, which stands for No Irish Need Apply. Terribly difficult for an Irishman to get a job in those days. And that's why they were trying to work their way up through politics. Anyway, somebody said to this fellow, "Hey, listen, Jack Kennedy, he's a senator and soon to be the president of the United States. He might do you some good." So this fellow went to see him. And Jack Kennedy said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I work in the federal building. I'll give you a job. I'll get you a job as a janitor." So he did. Well, this guy was so poor, and even with the job as janitor, he couldn't afford an apartment. So he lived in the federal building, and he would sleep in the bathroom, in the men's room, and so on. The funny thing about it is Jack Kennedy would be leaving for the night to go home, 6, 7, 8 o'clock. This guy is still there working. He'd come in the morning. The guy is still there. But Jack thinks he's just arrived again, first thing in the morning. This is the hardest working guy I've ever seen. So he said, "Listen, we need a candidate for the House of Representatives, a Democratic candidate. There's an opening. I'm going to run you for House of Representatives." So he did, backed him. The guy was elected. So he served in the House for, I think it was 4 or 5 terms. Then an opening as senator appeared. So Jack said, "Listen, you've done a good job. I'm going to put you up for senator." So he did. And the fellow was elected with Jack Kennedy's backing. He was elected senator. He served for a term as senator. Then he came back to Jack Kennedy and he said, listen, he said, Jack, I'd like you to do me a favor. And Jack said, for the love of Pete, what is left that I can do for you? I've made you a House of Representative. I've put you in the Senate. What more can I do for you? He said, you know, this country has been good to me. I'd like to become a citizen. True story.
Wow. That's an interesting story. Listen, I have to do this. It's 10:15, Jill.
Okay.
We are WXVU.org, 89.1 The Roar. We are broadcasting from live and on YouTube from Villanova University. And my co-host is Jill Frechie, award-winning documentarian. And my guest today is John F. Dobbyn. He is a retired law professor, retired attorney, and we can call him Jack, and we'll get into his books shortly. Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So after the Air Force, you became a lawyer.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to law school?
I went to Boston College Law School. You know, incidentally, the decision to go there was Bill. God gave me this decision. I'm sure of it, because 3 weeks before I got out of the Air Force, I had no idea where I was going to go. I was going to go back to Boston.
Re-enlist?
Pardon?
I'm sorry. Did they ask you to re-enlist?
Yeah, mhm.
Okay.
But I
And
knew, you know what I knew? I knew I didn't want a second lieutenant at Air Force Base, head of the Air Defense Command, to be telling me where I'm going to spend every year for the rest of my career. I just didn't want, because I had a close friend who had a good family, 3 children, and his next assignment was Thule, Greenland.
Mhm.
And Thule, Greenland is really the last place you want to go. It was so remote that he couldn't take his wife or family with him, so he was up there for a year. I said, they're not going to do that to me, so I'm out.
We
As they
may
say,
own
Shark
Greenland
Tank.
shortly.
We may, and maybe that'll improve
Maybe
it.
by next Wednesday.
It could be.
I
Um,
want to visit Greenland. I've heard good things about it.
It would be, well, you probably heard of ice. It's funny about those two terms. Greenland isn't. It's icy.
Right.
And
But I've been to Iceland.
Iceland
It's
is green.
But I've
yeah.
been to Iceland, and it was recommended that people see Greenland, and
Really?
it's really beautiful and
Ah,
one of the
nice.
most interesting places on the earth.
That's
So,
great.
Yeah.
So close to the Arctic,
Mhm.
which makes it attractive to the president.
Lois, you can sit at the table if you like, and you can, if you'd like to partake, you're welcome. Yeah, you're okay. Okay. All right. I just want to let you know you're not left out.
I want
Because I keep looking at you and I'm getting signs that, of where to go with the discussion,
Especially when I tell
Were
stories
you,
about
were you
your
married at the time you went to law school?
No, Lois and I had not met yet. But so 3 weeks before, I've got a great ski buddy, Bob Johnson, and he's a lawyer, Air Force lawyer. And one night, just very close to my getting out, he said, Jack, I got an interesting case tomorrow. It's an incest case, and going to be an interesting case. Why don't you drop around? You might enjoy watching the trial of a case. I said, gee, can the public go to a trial? I knew so little about it. So I did. I went that day, and the facts of the case were unbelievable. But I wasn't so much interested, I found, in the facts as I was the arguments of the lawyers. I was really taken up with that. So at the end of the day, Bob said, come on to dinner with me, Jack. We went to the Officers Club for dinner, and now he's the defense counsel. We were joined by the prosecuting counsel, and we were joined by the judge. So the 4 of us discussed the legal aspects of the case. So I was on midnight
Wait,
shift.
isn't that pretty unusual?
It's unheard of. As a matter of fact, it's not particularly advisable, but we did it. And the next, I was on the midnight shift at my job for till 7 a.m. I went home, got a shower, and went right back to court. And I did that for 3 days, and I applied to law school.
So
That's the way it
that's a
happened.
good segue into the story that we did, and John will tell you about it. Life Without Parole, the story of George Martirano, which we always
Oh.
argued that the judge and the defense attorney were in cohorts.
Jack would know who
really?
the defense attorney was. The defense attorney was Bobby Simone.
Oh, really? No kidding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But the judge was
John Hannum.
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 Did you
Oh, gee.
Did you know Hannum?
I've heard that name. I've heard that nickname. Yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed, and it was. I've always felt, I'm not going to get, because this is your show, but that the the defense lawyer was a nefarious, and he sold George Martirano out.
No
Yeah,
kidding.
Martirano was a drug kingpin, and
Yeah.
the judge sentenced him to life without parole. First time offense, no
Oh my
gun.
gosh, that's unheard of.
Yeah,
5 years in solitary.
Really?
So we created a documentary. We figured out who, what, why, and where, and now it's on Roku,
yeah.
Vimeo on demand,
No
and
kidding. Oh, I'd like
Yeah.
to see that.
You could do it.
it's free.
Mm.
If
I'd
you
like
go
your
to
opinion of it.
Roku, you don't need an app, and
I'll
then
write
Yeah.
it down for you.
Great.
Amazon
Good.
Prime. You can find it. If you
Amazon
just
Prime.
On Prime?
Google, and Prime. If you just Google,
I
you'll
have
find
Prime.
it.
Good.
Yeah.
I want to get the name of that.
So you then you went to work for a firm. What type of law did you practice?
Oh,
What
well,
field?
I started with one of the grandest men that ever lived, and one of the opposite, one of the grandest judges and most respectable individuals I've ever met. He's just a wonderful man, Judge Anthony Julian. He was a federal court judge, and I worked for him as clerk for 2 years after graduation from law school. And then I went to work for a law firm. And a lot of people had, did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the practice of law? I detested it.
Did you really?
I disliked it intensely. Yeah.
Why did you?
I
dislike
loved
it?
working with Judge Julian, working with the law. And I saw in the federal court the best trial attorneys in the country. And I went to work for one of the best trials. But Tom Burns was just a fantastic trial lawyer. And he asked me to come to work for him, and I did. But I found this: when you work for a firm, you have no choice whatsoever in the clients you represent. I never worked on a case that shouldn't have been lost. We should have lost the case because all of the justice was on the other side. We would represent a client who had all of the money in Boston and wanted all of the rest of the money in the world. So he would hire subcontractors and then say, "Oh, shoddy work. I'm not going to pay you. Not going to pay you." So these young electricians, young plumbers, and so on. And I was the low level here. So when he would do that, he'd say, "Well, you want your money? Sue me." Well, they can't sue him. They don't have the money or the time to sue him. But occasionally one would sue him. And when they would bring a lawsuit against him, then it was my job to squeeze a settlement at the minimum number of dollars out of this poor kid who has done a good job in the first place. And I detested every minute of that. But the fact was, I said, I can't, I'd say to the contractor, the young contractor, I can delay this case for 5, 6, 7 years. I can do that just procedurally in court. I know how to do that. So that's what you're facing. You really better settle this case, you know? And then I'd go back to my client, get as much money as I could. And, but I can remember, I detested every minute of doing that. I can remember there was a woman in Roxbury, black woman in Roxbury. Her husband had left her. She had a couple of kids, and she rented this rat trap of an apartment that was owned by one of our sweet clients. And anyway, she couldn't pay the $50 at the end of the month for her rent. So he threw her out. Now she's out on the street. Now he wants his $50. He's got all the money in the world. $50 isn't cigar money for this guy. And I'm the one at this level who brings the cause of action against her to sue her for the $50. So the trial is called, and I met her outside of the courtroom, and I said, I really am so sorry for you. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to put you on the stand. I know you don't have the $50, but I'm going to ask you questions, embarrassing questions. I'm going to ask you if you've got any gold in your teeth that we can dig out to give him his $50. Is there anything I can squeeze out of you to get the $50 for this fellow? That's what's going to happen. On the other hand, if you're not there when the case is called, I won't be able to do that, will I? Do you listen? Are you listening to me? And she said, yes, I'm listening to her. And I think I gave her $10 to go to a movie or something. But anyway, the case was called. Son of a gun, she wasn't there. So I couldn't call it a sin. He didn't get his $50, which made me feel good. I told Lois about it. We were dating then. I told us we both felt good about it, but I can't go on doing that. Can't go on, betraying the client. And if anybody ever heard about that, I would have been disbarred. So I left. I got out of that. Now the question is, what am I going to do? What am I going to do for a living? And my dad was a teacher.
How about your mom? You didn't
And my
say
mom
anything.
was a nurse. She was a registered nurse. But I knew my dad loved teaching, so I thought, boy, teaching, the law, what a combination that would be. And so in one summer, I left the law firm. Lois and I were married. We moved to the greatest university I can imagine, Villanova University, and began a 47-year career teaching here in heaven.
So what was, you saw like an advertisement in a legal intelligencer?
No,
What-
you know what happened? When I decided to go into teaching, I went back to Harvard Law School for a graduate degree because they had a program, a 1-year program, and it was a graduate to get a master of law. You get a master of laws after you get the Juris Doctorate. But anyway, um,
It does seem like it makes sense.
it's a little upside down, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. But anyway, it was an interesting class. It was a class of 100. 50 of the students were foreign, most of them European students, and 50 of them were American students.
Excuse me, did you have to be barred to take this class? I was
No.
wondering about that.
No, I was a member of the bar at the time, Boston Bar, but no, you didn't. Some of our students came and they were just fresh out of law school, but it was really an entry to teaching law, because
Are there different masters that you can take?
Yes. Oh,
so
yeah.
what was yours?
Mine, oh boy, what was it? I guess it would be in federal jurisdiction. What's the power of the federal court vis-a-vis the power of the state courts and that sort of thing.
Interesting.
Took a lot of courses in that area and loved it. But we an interviewer came from. They come from law schools all over the country, but one came from Villanova, and it was the darndest thing, because the man who came to interview me, his name was John Stevenson, and he was a professor here, an older professor here. We got to talking, and son of a gun, he had been in the Army during World War II. And he took classes to become a military attorney
A
when he
JAG
was
officer?
a JAG officer. Guess who his teacher was? My Judge Julian.
Wow. I wonder if a lot of lawyers have taken your class that are still practicing in Pennsylvania. I'm sure they would remember you. Or
Absolutely.
I'll have to ask you about some of our friends.
Oh,
yeah,
I'll
we
bet.
have a lot of them.
So many
Can we say their
Villanova
names?
lawyer graduates are still practicing in Pennsylvania.
I'm sure, because I just retired 8 years ago, and I run into them all the time. And we
What
figured it out.
courses did you take? Teach, I'm sorry.
I taught, constitutional criminal law, corporation law, insurance law, and I guess that was about it. My main interest was constitutional criminal law. That's fascinating field.
My daughter went through law school,
What law school?
Temple.
Good school.
Mm-hmm. And she's still unhappily practicing.
Unhappily.
No, I'm just joking.
She's a recovering lawyer.
No,
Yes,
she's
we all are.
happily practicing.
Why the constitutional law was the one that you liked the most?
Everybody who goes into it's funny. Everybody who goes into teaching.
If you have a story related to anything feel free to say it.
Oh, okay.
And anything that pops into your mind, feel free.
One just popped. Everybody who goes into teaching wants to teach constitutional law. It's just the most delightful. It's thoughtful. It's undecided. There are a lot of iffy areas, and so it's a wonderful area to teach. But I remember.
Are you saying there's gray areas in constitutional law?
Oh, good heavens, no!
Right. Oh,
We
okay.
live in the gray area. There's nothing but gray areas.
Oh, there
in
is.
constitutional law.
Okay.
But anyway, when I was going around after during that year, I was going around interviewing other law schools, and I can remember an interview with one particular law school, which I won't name. And there was a fellow who was interviewing me, and he said, "What do you want to teach?" I said, "I'd like to teach constitutional law." "Oh, all right. The case of Adams versus Burke. What were the facts of that case?" "I don't know. I took the course about 4 years ago. I have no idea. I can't remember. That was an insignificant case anyway." Well, he grilled me on it, and it was very uncomfortable for about 15 minutes. And then I finally left. I knew I wasn't going to get an offer from that outfit. Anyway, now I'm at Villanova. I'm on the recruitment committee for And I have to go out and interview a particular individual. Guess who the individual was that
His
walked in?
son.
No, him.
Oh no!
It was him. He came in, and now he's sitting there, and I'm saying to myself, "Are you going to do it?" And I said, "No, I am
Oh, you
not
didn't?
gonna do it."
Man.
No,
If you were
I-
Italian,
Oh,
you would have done it.
should have it.
no, I said no. I'll give him an easy time. We'll go out to lunch, and we'll forget about the whole thing.
Oh
Did
no,
it-
not me.
Wow.
The Italian would have put the dagger right in.
I felt sorry for
how
the poor guy.
important, I know there's a big controversy a couple years ago about rating and ranking. How
Mm.
important is that when you're going to
Yeah.
a law school and when you're teaching at a law school?
Unfortunately, it's very important. The U.S. News and World Report does a ranking of law schools, and we had an incident at Villanova where it was discovered when a new dean came in that the old dean had had a number of problems, but he had been fudging the numbers in terms of our grade point average of our entering class, and also the LSAT scores, and they to make them look higher, because that was what U.S. News and World Report was basing a large part of their ranking on. So we were higher up probably for those years than I don't know how many than we should have been. And when this new dean came in, realized that he did exactly the right thing. John Gatanda was his name. Boy, that man was thoroughly honest, because he knew the hailstorm that was going to descend on him, but he made it public. He just went public, went to the Bar Association, so and said, "This is what's been happening for the past 3 years. No more. I've cut it out, but I thought I should tell you." And sure enough, hellfire rained down on him. But he took it. We survived it. We changed. And on with the show. And I can't help wondering how many other law schools are out there that are doing exactly the same thing, and they're not caught, and they don't have to, I don't know that any are doing it, but the temptation is enormous, because students do base their choice of law schools on that. You know what a lot of students base their choice of law schools on? And this one always boggles my mind. The year that we won, the years when Jay Wright was with us, that we won the National Basketball Championship, our applications zoomed up for law school. Why? What
Yeah,
does the
no-
basketball team have
yeah,
to do with a law?
Yeah, with law
career?
school. Yeah.
Well,
Got
when you're a
me.
young person, you want to go to the game.
Yeah,
You want to
you're
have
want the
fun. You want to
tickets.
be, and it's
Right.
and then you're also nationally recognized. So maybe
That's true. For
From-
whatever reason,
from
that's
Reddit,
true.
yeah, they recognize the name. I know my,
Yeah.
but there's a big competition between Temple, Villanova,
Right.
and
There is.
Drexel now. There's so many
Yes.
choices.
There
And the-
are
and the-
right
and-
here.
Yeah. And do you does the law school frequently give scholarships?
We do. We frequently
So
get
that
scholarships.
helps.
We do. That helps.
That
Yeah.
helps to diversify the
Yeah, to
community.
very competent, graduates from college who have a good background and that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Pitt is another good.
It is. Yeah, and they're within the range. That's
Mhm.
true.
Did you? Before we'll get to your books in a second. Did you know Whitey Bulger?
I never had the pleasure. Ooh, I'm still alive, John. Wow, there's
he's
a
a
name out of the
Boston guy.
past.
I sent him the books to read in jail because he was quite a reader, and he would get up at 5 o'clock and read in jail, and I sent him Jack's book.
That's right.
Wow.
You sent Whitey Bulger books?
Right. My wife is saying that she sent it.
Oh,
She
you
did.
you knew him. Come on.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, you knew Whitey Bulger.
No, actually, oh golly, to know Whitey Bulger was to walk a fiddler on the roof, because that man would kill for
That
no really good reason.
That was like Nicky Scarfo.
Oh,
Yeah.
His calling
that's
card.
scary.
Right.
That
That's
killed.
right too.
Did you?
Oh,
Did
wait,
you?
going back to the law. I'm sorry, I
No,
interrupted,
no,
but
no.
I did have a
No,
question. I
no.
think
You're the co-host.
maybe other
You're
people
free to-
might have the.
You should
this
ask
question.
questions as well.
Sure.
You said you didn't like the law firm you worked for, but
Right.
what type of law was it? Just general law?
It was for two types of law. I had my own practice in a sense, because having worked in the federal court for 2 years, I got to know, of course, Judge Julian and his friend Judge Caffrey and several of the others. And boy, stories flood back. And so the result was, when they would need to appoint a lawyer to represent an indigent defense counsel, occasionally they'd call on me. So I was doing a certain amount of criminal law. But that was my own. Primarily, I was hired to do the firm's business, which was be the trial portion of a firm that represented corporate clients, primarily corporate client. When I say corporate clients, that sounds like an amorphous mass. It isn't. At the top, it's owned by, in our case, 2 or 3 very wealthy individuals. So they primarily were our clients. It was that kind of law.
I always wondered, is it difficult to represent as a criminal attorney? You said typically they're guilty. So going
Usually.
with what you said earlier,
Right.
is it hard to defend them? How do you deal with the morality of that?
You know what?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and I'll give you the cocktail party answer to that. The the standard reply to that is everybody has a right to all of their constitutional rights, and they have a right to the best defense that the law can provide them. Because on the other side is we have an antagonistic milieu in which criminal trials are prosecuted. The prosecutor is out to prosecute. Theoretically, the prosecutor also has a moral obligation to disclose anything that would be helpful to the defense and to dismiss a case that the prosecutor finds is not worthy. Defense counsel has one object in mind: within the law, every defense possible. So the fact is that even though you've got somebody who has committed some horrible crime against a child or whatever, that person is entitled to a rightful defense, because a lot of innocent people are convicted, usually on eyewitness testimony, which is the most unreliable form of testimony, of evidence there is. Absolutely.
Yeah, Charles Peruta was great at tearing that apart.
Yes, that's right
I
too.
would love to have been
Part
able
of
to.
part of our research was there was a jailhouse snitch that lied.
You're talking about
and then-
Moreno.
Right. And the prosecutor did not divulge that information. And
Yeah.
so they put the wrong person in prison, and then he got out. When the new DA came in, found out, let the other guy out, then they couldn't prosecute the other guy. It's a mess.
Yeah. But
It's a mess.
It does get that way.
before I ask you about F. Lee Bailey, I have to do something.
Okay.
We are WXVU.org, 89.1 The Roar. Thank you, Alan Shear, for reminding me to do that every 10 or 15 minutes. And our guest today is Jack Dobbyn, author, which we're going to get into his books shortly after I ask him about F. Lee Bailey. Jack, as a lawyer in Boston, did you know F. Lee Bailey?
I did. Yeah, I did meet Lee Bailey. Lee Bailey was a fascinating character. I'll tell you something about Lee Bailey. The way he went to Boston University Law School, and he was kind of a struggling
That's different
lawyer.
than Boston College,
Oh yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, totally different university. Anyway,
Is Boston College Jesuit?
yeah, Boston College is Jesuit, and
Boston U
Boston is non-denominational. It's not
okay.
religious
Yeah, it's public.
affiliated.
For lack of another word.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Lee Bailey got his start with The Fugitive. Do you
Right.
remember Dr. I forget his name now?
Shepard.
Shepard, Dr.
Alan
Alvin Shepard. Exactly right.
No, don't bang on the table.
No,
That's
that was
reserved-
like first
that's reserved
instruction.
for
Don't bang on the
Italians.
table.
Italians bang on the table.
Shepard was convicted in one of the worst, most unbalanced trials probably that ever existed, because there was a newspaper in Ohio that tried his case against him. It tried the case because every day there would appear in headlines something that indicated that Shepard was guilty. And you, jury, you better find him to be guilty or else. Anyway, so he was convicted. Now, Lee Bailey got in touch with him for when they went up on appeal, and he said, listen, there's a new kind of thing. We're going to try something new if you're willing. There is a thing called a lie detector test, polygraph test, and I have become an expert in it, and he had. So he convinced the court to allow him to do that, and he gave Shepard the lie detector test, which, of course, he passed, saying, I did not commit the crime. A one-armed man was present in the apartment, and I broke in on it, and he murdered my wife. I saw him murder, and then he escaped. So Lee Bailey got his case reversed, and then he used the lie detector evidence, and he was eventually found not guilty.
Wow.
And then he became, oddly enough, a motorcycle gang member, or not, not a bad one, but a motorcycle gang, and spent the rest of his life on a motorcycle. I guess.
Who? F. Lee Bailey.
No,
Shepherd.
Shepherd.
Got
But
it.
Lee Bailey then was in national prominence, and he went on
He
from
was a
there.
young guy at the time, right?
He was a young guy at the time. But I'll tell you something about Lee Bailey. If you walked into a room, if you walk into a courtroom, and there is the judge, you got the most famous judge in the world, and you got the most famous prosecutor and the most famous defendant in the world. And there's Lee Bailey sitting beside him. Your eyes are glued to Lee Bailey. He had that presence. I mean, he could have been a movie star. He was fascinating that way. And when he addressed a jury, the jury was rapt by every word that he said. So he was extremely successful in getting.
Did you ever see him try a case?
Yeah, and it was true. It was true. You just couldn't take your eyes off of him. And whatever he said, there was just something about the way he said it that it rang. Boy, that's true. What he said is true. Not guilty.
And that's it.
Fascinating guy.
So in reading your books, you have a love for diamonds, horse racing,
Yeah.
50s jazz, artwork, and food, restaurants.
Oh,
It sounds like
all of
you.
those things.
Well,
It does.
yeah. Well,
Especially the jazz
I'm
part.
not a horse person.
Especially the jazz.
Oh, the jazz, yeah, for definitely,
Good for you.
and everything but the horses.
Uh-huh.
With the first book you did is Black Diamond, right?
Yeah. No, the first one was Neon Dragon.
Okay, but how did you go from law professor to author? There's a transition there, so we got to make that arc.
Sure. It was clearly and obviously because Lois wanted to take tennis lessons.
What?
Yeah.
She wanted to play tennis.
Is there a bit of a gap there? Let me fill in the gap. It was sometime after we arrived in Villanova. We live in Valley Forge, and
Valley Forge is a suburb of Philadelphia.
it is.
Just because we have an international, we have listeners in Australia and Germany.
Yeah, so I understand.
And Sweden, and we have Guy Lido. We have Guy Lido in Buffalo, New York. And
No kidding.
I think he's in witness protection.
Oh,
That's just.
Can't mention
But anyway,
that.
go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
we moved into an area. We live right next to Valley Forge Park, where Washington, by the way, took the troops to this conglomerate group of farmers with guns. And during that winter in Valley Forge, which was incredible, I don't know why I got started on this, but it grabs my mind every time I think of it. George Washington was the greatest leader this country has ever had, bar none. He led an army of a few thousand men, literally through the snow and ice, and they came from this area and marched to Valley Forge, but marched, most of them, and I mean this literally, without shoes, without socks, some of them without coats, barely a shirt, and they followed him, and they stayed with him until he brought in a Prussian general, and that Prussian general drilled them into an army. And to cut the story short, an army that could defeat the strongest army in the world, the British Army. An incredible story. Anyway, that's Valley Forge. What were we talking about? Why did I bring?
How did you become an
How did I
author?
And
become an
that
author?
story is retold in the
Lois
and
playing tennis.
Right, that's right.
that story is retold in the American Revolutionary Museum. So
Yes.
that's a plug for them because they really do
Right.
an outstanding job
Good.
teaching young people
Good.
about those battles, those
Good.
early battles.
Would you remind me again, John? But I want to just throw this in. When Washington led the troops into Valley Forge, there was nothing there. There was just a tree-covered area in Valley Forge. It was at a good position to be defended against the British Army, which was occupying Philadelphia at the time. And if they attacked, which they would have decimated that, we would not be America today if they had. Anyway, Washington wanted his men under roof, first of all. So he said, the first order of business is you will cut down these trees and you will build these huts that some of them are still standing in Valley Forge. You will build those huts. And to get you to do it fast, I will give $200 to the first team of 8 to complete the hut.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. As a matter of fact, it was so much money that some of the groups of 8 built them without even a fireplace, without anything to heat. to get the $200. Others said, forget the $200. We're going to have a fireplace and, a chimney and so on. Anyway, during the time before those buildings were complete, George Washington had a beautiful building, a nice office, a nice bedroom. It was a wonderful place to sleep, and he would not use it. He would not go in there. He slept in a tent like the rest of the fellas until the last man was under roof. And those men
That's
idolized
leadership.
him.
That's leadership.
Real leadership.
Yeah,
That's why they stayed.
I looked at your bio, and I'm going to go back to the Lois, you becoming an author, she playing tennis.
Right. Oh,
in
yes.
in a second. But your undergraduate degree is in the classics and linguistics.
It is. Yeah. Latin and linguistics. Yeah.
Do you speak Latin?
No.
No?
No.
Does
No.
anybody speak Latin?
Well,
Yes.
coincidentally,
Actually,
There are
priests do.
the priest that I met
Oh.
yesterday that we will be interviewing
Wow.
actually spoke and wrote Latin. Actually,
Yeah.
I think he's forgotten some of it. But
Yeah.
yes, I question amidst all the other questions I was asking him.
You're right. They
any-
do.
So the classics, you mean like Shakespeare?
No, classics in terms of Latin. In terms of Cicero, for example, Catullus and Livy and Ovid and the old, classical Latin authors.
14 years of Latin, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And 14 years of Latin. And do I speak it? No.
Were you an altar
It was
boy
primarily
in church?
reading.
What made you interested in Latin?
Going through Boston Latin School, having 6 years of it at Latin school, and realizing, when I was choosing a major at Harvard, we had an advisor who advised us all. And he said, do not select your, by the way, whoever's listening, do not select your major based upon how much good you think it will do you, how much it'll apply to what you think you're going to do in later life. That will change. What you do in later life will probably change, but that's beside the point. Pick whatever grabs your interest the most, whatever you love and are interested in and would enjoy studying. Pick that, no matter how useless, like Latin, because you'll do the best in it. You'll get the best grades in it. And then, your career will be so much the better off.
Good advice, because so
Yeah.
many students just
My
flounder.
counselor here
What's-
told me that as well.
Really,
Yeah, told me the same thing.
it was good advice.
Yeah, and ironically, it's evolved into that.
Hmm.
The communications that I talk in. When I graduated high school, I couldn't write a complete sentence. I didn't know where to put a period or a noun or.
But also, many students don't realize that life isn't a straight line. They may pick something and then something else and something else. So this is great advice. Pick the thing you love, and then you'll
Right.
excel in it, and then go from there.
Then you got a basis for applying for any job. That's
Mhm.
right.
Good advice.
Okay,
Back to
Lois?
my
Back to the
original.
tennis. Back to tennis.
Back to tennis.
Okay, honey, you'll remember this one. So we move into this neighborhood, and after we've been there a couple
Valley
of years,
Forge Mountain.
Valley Forge Mountain, yeah, we realized that a lot of the women there are consumed with tennis. They're all up there playing tennis. So Lois says, "Hey, I'd like to play. I'd like to take tennis lessons." Great.
So you're a professor here now.
I was a professor here now.
Okay.
So anyway, we signed her up for tennis lessons with a mainline night school, and I want to
That's very
drive
good
her and be
school,
with
by
her.
the way.
Yeah, it really is. I want to drive her and be with her. So what am I going to do while she's swinging tennis balls? So I looked through the menu. I looked through the list of courses available. The only one that was even remotely, and I mean remotely interesting, was a course in creative writing. So so I signed up for that. It turned out that it was with one of the grandest ladies you could imagine. Golly, her name won't occur to me, but Jean Hortenberg. And she was a writer of children's stories and an award winner. Anyway, she gave us an assignment. And the assignment was creative writing. I want you to write 5 paragraphs on the 5 senses. Use the 5 senses. Write me 5 paragraphs, like a walk through the woods, smelling the birds, hearing the trees, all of that stuff. That sounded relatively boring. So I decided, it'd be more fun than that. And I wasn't really serious about this. I'm going to do what my students do, and they get away with it sometimes. When I ask them a question, if they don't know the answer to the question, they'll answer their own question and hope I don't notice the difference, right? So I'll try that. So I did. And what I thought was, wouldn't it be fun to write a short mystery story and make the detective a blind criminology professor? So he has to rely on the 4 senses heavily. So I did that. And it was just fun. I handed it in, and she was exceedingly kind, exceedingly generous. And she said, I think you should send this to a magazine. How do you do that? So she told me, and I sent it to a magazine called Mike Shane's Mystery Magazine. It's no longer in existence. Mike Shane's Mystery Magazine. It was a famous. Mike Shane was a famous detective. Brett Halliday wrote the Mike Shane novels and had a radio show and so on. So I sent it to them. Anyway, this is where our Lord stepped in, because they bought it. They bought my story first time out of the box, and they bought the story and they published it. And I was hooked. I mean, before that, I had no interest in writing it whatsoever. They bought that story, and I thought, wow, I got to do this again. So I started writing mystery stories, and I sent those mystery stories to every publication but the phone book. I tried everything. For 6 years, I would write stories that would bounce back. They'd hardly land on the desk of the editor before they'd be sent. I had a feeling that when I dropped that story into the mailbox, we had mailboxes in those. When I dropped that story in the mailbox, there was somebody on the other end, and at exactly that moment, they're dropping the rejection letter in. Anyway, but why did I keep on? Because of Lois, because she came up with a wonderful idea. I'd write a story, print it. Now I drop it in the mailbox. Now, as soon as I get home, Lois said, now start the next one. Start the next one. What she's saying is before you get the rejection. Because if you start it, you'll be halfway through it by the time you get a rejection slip, if in fact you do, and you'll be induced to finish the story and keep on. Don't quit. So anyway, I did that. 6 years of that. But with every rejection, I learned something about the art of writing mystery stories. And it is an art, and it is far more complicated than it seems on the surface. I mean, I've run into so many friends who say, oh, golly, I could do that. I could write that. Yeah, I read this. I could write one of those. Everybody, so you really can't. There's so much to learn. And over 6 years, I finally was getting the hang of it. Anyway, 6 years later, I sent one to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, which bills itself as the world's leading mystery magazine, and most authors would agree with that. I figured if I'm going to get a rejection letter, it should have some class, right? When I put it up on the wall, it's going to from Ellery Queen. I got back the rejection letter, but when I opened it, I almost fell on the ground, because handwritten in the margin by the editor was, don't quit, you're getting close. So she must have actually known, from anyway. So then I really put some time into the next one. She bought the next one, and then she bought 20 more after that. And then I sold 10 more short stories to Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Man. And by that time, things were rolling. But you reach a point where it's fine to walk the foothills, but eventually you got to climb Mount Everest. You got to write a novel. And thank God I waited till that point to write Neon Dragon. Yeah.
How well do you know the Chinese gangs?
Pretty well. Better than most people, believe it or not. With a face like this, better than most people.
How did that come about?
That was interesting. That God provided that too. I had a classmate at Boston Latin School. Then he went to Harvard with me, and his name was Donald Dong. God love him. And Donald had come over to this country. He came over to this country at about 8 years old, and his grandmother had come over prior to that. What a woman she must have been. What a woman. This is a Chinese woman who came over to this country alone. You can't imagine the prejudice that she had to face. But what she did was she went up and down the East Coast, and she very brilliantly looked for a neighborhood where there were mailboxes with Jewish names, because she knew that Jewish people share, I found this later on, they share an inability to digest milk products with the Chinese. The Chinese have the same problem. So Chinese food has no milk products in it, you'll find. Jewish people look for food that has no milk products in it, and Jewish people love Chinese food. So she would plant a restaurant every time she'd find one. And then she went back to China as a queen. She had enough money to live as absolutely the queen of China. And Donald was raised until the age of 8 when his father, when they Mao Zedong made that march to the sea, and China became communist, and they drafted his father into the communist army. So the grandmother and Donald's mother, and Donald fled to the United States. He came to Boston, went to Boston Latin School, and we became very good friends. Now, Donald lived in Boston's Chinatown and lived there, for all the time I was with him. Anyway, we were such good friends that Donald would take me into Chinatown and show me things that people with a face like mine don't see. And he introduced me to, for example, there's a block with a grimy, age-old brick buildings on Tyler Street in Boston. And he said, do you see that building? If you were to climb those stairs, and you better not, if you were to climb those stairs, he said, and open it, you would be walking into what's called the 24-hour gambling den of the Chinese, we call them mafia, the Chinese gang, the Chinese Tong. It is the Chinese Tong, which we think hasn't existed since the 20s. It does. It's vibrant in every Chinatown. But that gambling den, strictly for Chinese, but that enough money passes through that bank. It's open 24 hours a day, that banking, to finance all of the other criminal activities of the Tong, the prostitution, bringing in people, shuttling them in and out of Canada and from China, and gambling, heaven knows, gambling and drugs and so on. Donald showed me these things, and he said, you would be if you walked in there, you would see a gambling den that exceeds anything you could find in Atlantic City or Las Vegas. Really, but don't ever try it.
Did you ever feel threatened because you weren't Chinese?
I did not, because we never went near. We went by, but never in. And Donald was careful to keep me out of any place that would be touchy.
Well, there's been a lot of controversy about our Chinatown, and with the new stadium, then they were talking about that it's tired, but I just did hear that we actually have a similar thing, but not publicly, where you can take a tour of Chinatown. It's fascinating. The person I was talking to was telling me about it, and you go in and out of the streets, and there's a lot more commerce. But I'm wondering if there's a gambling den.
It's there. I'm sure. It's
and I don't think that's part of the public tour.
No, undoubtedly. You'd lose a lot of tourists.
Your protagonists, Lex and Michael.
Yeah.
Are you an alter ego of any of them? I always ask authors that question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I have two. I can remember when I first decided to write the novel, and it was going to be Neon Dragon, about Chinatown, using Donald's information as the background. And I actually had a character that was based on Donald, pretty much. But I can remember when I first started, I was driving down Route 202. That's where they were born. And I thought, I need who are going to be my main characters? And that's when I came up with Michael Knight, who's a 27-year-old. He is. And the funniest thing was, and God put this in my mind, the funny thing is, I said, I think I'll make him half Irish and half Puerto Rican. Why? I don't know. Maybe someday it will. I'm writing a novel right now, and I was trying to think last week, where's it going to go from here? All of a sudden, boy, thank God he is half Puerto Rican, because I'm dealing with horse racing this time and the Latino jockeys, and all of a sudden I've got a connection. But anyway, that was Michael Knight. I wanted to pair him up with a tough older lawyer, and I thought of my Uncle Dick that I talked about before.
And he was a lawyer.
No, he was
the one.
Basically, he was just
He's
brilliant.
The Joe Kennedy guy.
Yeah, he was the Joe Kennedy.
Took the bar exam for him or something.
Well,
I'm only kidding.
Allegedly.
Does Michael Knight in every story?
He has been in the first six novels, and it was a series.
How many have you done altogether?
6, and then I wrote the last one. The last one was Deadly Depths, and Deadly Depths started with a brand new, totally different character, because the series I had put poor Michael, I had put him through hell. I had put him in serious danger of his life in every one of those. and unkind as it was. So I finally realized that now he's married at the end of the sixth one. A child is on the way. I got to take better care of this kid. So I gave him a rest through this novel. And
Are you working on anything now?
Yeah, I am. As a
You-
matter of fact,
You could do something with John Gotti was married to a Jewish woman.
yeah.
She wasn't a Sicilian or Italian.
Mhm.
So you could do something like a mob type of thing with the guy's Italian and the wife's Jewish.
That's right.
You could do a story like that.
That's right.
You know, what
Yeah.
a combination that would
The
be.
combination
All about heisting
is
people.
interesting. That
Well, he likes to go on things that he knows.
Yeah, well, he knows a lot. He's a Renaissance man. I got to do this. 11 o'clock. We are WXVU.org. And our guest today is John F. Jack Dobbyn, and he's the author, and we're discussing his books right now. And my co-host is Jill Frechie.
Now, I just want to point out that John's not making a mistake. You did say your name was John or Jack, so a lot of people do switch
Well,
that
his
around.
books say John F. So,
but he goes as Jack.
and your books are
But you
available.
like to be
on
called Jack.
we have had 4 Johns in a row in our family in generations. So
Oh,
to
sure.
keep it straight, who's being called for dinner, we go John, Jack, and I wound up with the Jack.
Wait, I have a question. When you're writing your book, and it's probably a question for your wife, do you stay somewhat in character? I know some writers have a hard time. They say they can't really relax until their story is completely told. Are you constantly thinking about it? For just people that want to write a
Yes.
novel, it's not as
Yes.
easy as just sitting down and writing. And how long does each
You're
book
right.
take you?
You know, it depends on the book in terms of the how long. But you're right. You know, in terms of the characters, Lois has told me several times, because between books, let me put it this way. John le Carré, you know,
Yep.
famous author John le Carré. I heard him interviewed one time, and one of the questions they asked him was, when you have gone through all of the labors of, and it is climbing Mount Everest to write a novel, you go from short story 6,000 words to 100,000 words for the average mystery novel. But they said, when you finish this mammoth work, labor, do you feel an exhilaration, a tremendous feeling of, oh boy, you know? And he said, I go into an immediate depression. And I don't go into a depression at the end of writing, but Lois has told me a number of times, I know you are the happiest when you're in the middle of writing a novel, when it's really moving. And that's true. Because just what you said, are you writing constantly? Yeah. Am I in the shower thinking about? Yes. Am I lying in bed before I go to sleep? Yes. Am I driving? Yes. Are you thinking about the novel? Yes, constantly. It grabs you.
And it's almost like you're losing a friend because your
That's right.
character is becoming,
I wouldn't
intimate.
have the
You're very
patience.
intimate
I
with.
have no
But we
patience to
had
do
that when we did Kensington. Afterwards, we were
yes.
extremely
Filming
saddened,
making
and
a
it was-
documentary, because you get to know you
you
actually
know, the
Right.
community and then we left
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
We were still somewhat.
You live in
involved,
in a drug ravaged community, and it just you become numb to it,
Yeah.
and you're in it all the time.
Yeah.
So do you is this like a fantasy for you to be in these situations? Is that
Yeah, I'm not sure fantasy. Well, yeah, maybe fantasy is the right word, because when I sit down to write, basically I have no idea where the novel is going. There are two forms of writers. There are the plotters who, line up everything that's going to happen on every in detail. Janet Ivanovich will have every single item in the book lined up in their notes. Then she sits down and writes the dialogue or whatever. That would drive me bananas. Lee Child said the same thing. It would drive him absolutely nuts with boredom, filling in the blanks at that point. I prefer his way of doing it, and that is let it surprise me when I'm writing it. Because if it surprised me, oh, son of a gun, that's what's going to happen next. That's who did it. And I'm surprised. Now I'm writing it, and maybe that surprise works its way into the words. They call those pantsers, flying by the seat of your pants, which is my favorite.
Your book Black Diamonds has an Irish flag on it with a clover and blood on it. What's tell me about Black Diamond? Tell us about Black Diamonds.
Let me see. Black Diamond. I got to tell you that I can write. Do my best. I can handle the 100,000 words in a novel. I cannot write a 2-word title to save my life. I cannot compress anything, the whole novel into 2 words that suggest the whole thing. But I had the wisdom, the brilliance to marry a girl who can. And all of my titles are written by Lois. So I can remember when I first,
Congratulations.
really. So when we were driving along one day, and Lois said, "Well, you have started the new novel. What's the novel? What's the subject?" I said, "It's going to be horse racing." And I said, "Come up with a title." And all of a sudden, she came up with the title "Black Diamond," which is the name of the horse. And it takes place.
I like diamonds.
Right.
And I like black
That's
horses.
right.
I always bet on a black horse.
Thank that. Lois is now sitting in with us. You're on camera too, Lois.
Welcome aboard, babe.
Well, welcome aboard. Right.
The wife has to endure a lot for being married to a writer.
Yes.
No.
You do? No?
And he'd written law books before that, so they're still being used.
Yeah, on the Constitution. Right.
Right.
And
Injunctions.
insurance.
Some of them. Yeah. Yeah. No, this
But
is
you
much
have
more
to be
fun.
patient. It must take him a lot of time.
You
away.
know,
But
it varies though. I'll try to grab the trick is to grab 2 or 3 hours in our life, which has become so much more busy since I retired. I don't know why, but it has. But I like to grab 2 or 3 hours so you get a momentum. Ernest Hemingway had a great idea, and that was, he said, he too wrote off the cuff, not knowing what was going to happen next. But he said, when I get the next idea, I get to the end of the day, I'm getting tired, and I know what's going to happen next, and I don't write it. Don't write it. Close the book, make a note, but close the book. And then the next morning, I know where to start. I'm going to start with that idea. I didn't write it. Now I get the momentum. Now I can go on and do it. And I find that's a perfect thing to do. So I always leave that last thought unwritten. For any prospective writers, that really works well.
So what happens in Black Diamonds? And then I want to get to my favorite book.
Okay.
Well, 2 of them.
Black Diamond was basically about horse racing, and it dealt with
Because you like the horses.
I got introduced by my parents taking me to Suffolk Downs in Boston at the age of 3, and practically every weekend we'd go to the
ride?
races. I rode. Yeah, I had a quarter horse when I was in Montana for 3 years. But Lois and I got interested after we were married in going to Saratoga Springs, one of our favorite places on earth. And during the racing season. And then I met a fellow there who went to West Point and got out of the Army and said, I'm going to combine my knowledge of business with my first love, which is horse racing. And he set up West Point Thoroughbreds, where the company would buy a horse, usually a 2-year-old, and then would syndicate it. And he became a good friend of mine. He'd come to me and say, would you like to buy 5% of the horse? Now, I can't put $200,000 into a horse, but I could put 5 or 3 or 4% into it and buy, 5% of the horse. And then you always feel like you own the whole thing anyway, from tail to nose.
And did that ever pay off?
We lost money on every one. There were about 5 of them.
It's horse racing is a dirty business. So.
Yeah.
Dirty,
Oh my
dirty.
gosh,
It's
John.
like the boxing. It's like boxing. It's a dirty
Oh,
business.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. My favorite.
Money. That's what does it. Money.
Money ruins everything.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It does.
My favorite book is Frame Up. It's not about a
Good.
painting that was stolen
Yeah.
out of the Gardner
That's exactly
Museum.
right. Yeah.
And then no one knows where the painting is. What's a $600 million painting? Still.
No price on it because it was the painting. They stole several things. One item, the major item, was a painting by Vermeer. Vermeer only painted 35 paintings. To say that it is priceless is not to misuse that word. You cannot you can't name the number of millions of dollars that people would pay for that particular. It was probably the greatest artist that ever lived, and only 35 paintings out there. And that painting was stolen and has never been recovered. Oh, that's what gave rise to that novel. Shall I press on?
Yeah, no, go ahead, please. It's your show.
What struck me at that time, I got interested in writing something about art forgery, art theft, that sort of thing. It's a fascinating world. But what occurred to me is, suppose that you stole that painting out of the Gardner Museum, and it was a relatively easy theft because they had no protection. Now you've got that painting. What are you going to do with it? You can't sell it. You can't put it on eBay or something. It is so famous that there's nothing you can do with it, right? That was my question. What could you do with it? So I got into gangland and that sort of thing, Russian mafia and all that. I realized there is something you can do with it. And this is what, suppose that the Russian mafia holds this valuable painting. I was just basing it on that, but suppose a hypothetical, very valuable stolen painting. All right, lock it up in a vault in Switzerland. All right, now there are two financiers. This is true. There are two financiers, and they are in Amsterdam. They exist to finance criminal activity. And they do it on the basis of security, sound security. So I'm the representative of this Russian mob. I've got the painting. It's in the vault. I go to you, my financier, and I say, all right, I want, $20-30 million to buy arms to sell or illegally or whatever. I want $50 million. You say, what's your security? My security is that painting. Where is it? I'll tell you where it is when you agree, and you agree. All right. Now you send your expert to this little vault in Switzerland. It's taken out of the vault, shown to your expert. Your expert looks at it and says, yep, back in the vault. Yes, it's authentic. They loan me the money now. The painting never has to appear publicly. And it's used to finance the criminal activity of this international mob. So that became the theory, the basis for that second novel.
Isn't there a benefit to an insurance company that they could raise insurance rates because for whatever
they can? Sure,
does that occur?
Yeah, it does. It didn't in this, but in the case of it is an odd situation. But do you know that none of those paintings were insured by the Gardner Museum? They didn't carry a dime of insurance on any of them, and you know why? Because Mr. Gardner, who put the collection together and then left it to his wife in the beautiful Gardner Museum, he said, I leave this to my wife, but here's the deal. Here is the absolute rule. If the collection is complete, it remains complete. It will not change. If there's a painting stolen or taken away, it will not be replaced. I want this collection to be just as I have put. So if you can't replace the painting anyway, why insure it? Yeah. And so they carried no insurance on that.
In Fatal Odds, the book with do you actually have a bird that's in your house that sits on your shoulder?
Mickey is my second editor. Yeah. Mickey's an African gray parrot. He's been with me 22 years now.
They live a long time, don't they?
Oh, he's going to live to be 75. So Lois and I got to take care of ourselves.
You said that in Fatal Odds, number one was drugs or weapons, or number two was either drugs or weapons, and number three were pets.
Yeah. Well,
how did you come up with that story?
It's funny, John. You shop around for just an idea, the grain of an idea, and then that triggers everything, and then God takes over. In fact, God probably initiates it. I really believe that's where I get my ideas. I open my mind, and He puts them in there, and I write them. He gets the credit. But for this one, came from the smallest thing. I was reading the Inquirer one day. I can remember it was page 7. Little tiny column on page 7, and it referred to the fact that one of the most prosperous criminal activities is one that nobody practically is aware of, and that is the illicit dealing in endangered wild species. And that caught my imagination. So then I really started reviewing it, and I got into a lot. There's very little written on it because nobody is paying any attention to it. Wild animals, they don't affect my life. I don't care. Yeah, but you gotta care because everything on this earth is connected with everything else. You remove, for example, let a particular animal become extinct, and extinction is forever. The things that animal feeds on now will take over and overrule an area. The thing that feed on this animal will probably disappear because now there's no food and the chain just continues and continues and continues. So we are losing, for example, and it's ridiculous. rhinoceros, for example. Rhinoceros, there are two forms of rhinoceros, black and white. Black are gone. The white rhinoceros is almost to extinction when finally they caught on and started preserving them. Why? There's a little horn on the front of the
Right,
rhinoceros.
like a unicorn.
The word got out, and I think it was a Chinese spreading this word, that if you take that horn and grind it up, it will promote men's virility. It will cure cancer. It will do none of that. I mean, it's like chewing your fingernail. But for that horn, they have slaughtered rhinoceros down almost to extinction. And that's just one example. So that's why I wrote the book. Usually my books come in at 90,000 words. I have a wonderful editor and publisher. And I can remember this one got up to 100,000. And I sent it in and said, Bob, Pat, do you want me to cut it down? And I remember Bob saying, no, this one is too important. We're going to keep it at 100,000.
What? And there's a frog. A frog that has the most venomous frog.
Yes, there is.
There is, and that was in Fatal Odds too.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to initiate and start to get a contract with a publisher? And are you with the same publisher all these years?
Can I tell you a story? The answer is, yeah, it's just shy of, well, I won't say that. I was going to say it's just shy of impossible. It is exceedingly difficult to get into publication now, to get a publisher to accept, a new novel. I was writing short stories for Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine. Linda, I can't think of her last name, was the editor of Alfred Hitchcock. Her husband was the editor of fiction editor for the New England University Press at Dartmouth, right? And
thank God you
so-
brought
yeah, I know.
Lois with
She's
you.
my memory
Oh.
bank, and everything else. Anyway, she took it to him. He read it and said, "Oh, good, we'll publish it." All of a sudden, we got a book to be published, and they put it out. Neon Dragon was the first one, and they put it out. And boy, 2 months after it was out, they loved it. They said, "Hey, you got to have a second novel for us, and we want it by Labor Day. Can you do it?" I said, "Whether I can or not, I will." And so I spent all summer working on the second novel and had it ready to go. And I got word from them that, there was a board of directors meeting of the University Press, and they said, no more fiction. So all of a sudden, I am totally adrift again. I have no publisher. But I came across an article in Writer magazine on a publishing house that was fairly new at that time. It's a major publisher today. And it's called Ocean View Publishing. So I sent the novel off to them, and she read the novel. Pat Gusson was the editor. Bob Gusson, her husband, is the publisher, and she read it and sent it back. And before I got to that point, oh golly, when I got the word that University Press was not going to publish it, I went to my agent, and I had an agent, New York agent, at that time. And I said, "Hey, here's the deal. I'm adrift again. You got to find me a publisher for this novel." He said, "Well, this is going to be tough." He said, "First of all, it's a mystery novel, mystery thriller novel. Nobody likes mysteries anymore. So it's going to be tough." And then he said, "And it's part of a series. Nobody reads series anymore." I thought, they don't? He said, "So I'm going to have a terrible time publishing this. I'll try, but don't keep your hopes up." I went into a 3-day depression, and Lois, who notices everything, said, "Listen, your problem is not your novel. Your problem is your agent. Get rid of him." I called him that day and said, "Hey, let's go our separate ways." That was when I found this Ocean View Publishing. I sent the novel to him, and Pat Gusson, the editor wrote back and said, "I'll tell you what, we will publish it if you can eliminate 10,000 words. And that was on a Friday. And Lois and I sat in my study, and we went over every line in that book and cut out some of my favorite lines in the
always
whole book.
happens.
On the floor they would go. we cut out the 10th. I sent it to her. They published it, and they published what 5, 6, and they went back and published Neon Dragon under their title, and they published 6 in that Michael Knight, the Lex Devlin series. They're the most wonderful publishers in the world. And then this last one, Deadly Depths.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about. You have great covers too, by the way.
Thank you.
Whoever
They
whoever
hired
comes
the
up with this,
cover.
Lois come up with the covers too.
No, but she approves them. She and I both. They'll send us
Tell me about Deadly Depths and High Stakes.
Okay, Deadly Depths. That's our latest one, and my favorite. I shouldn't say that about my children. You can't have a favorite child, can you? But
Well, it's just.
but it is. It is. It was the most fun to write. Deadly Depths. It came out in hardcover August 1st, 2 years ago, and this last August in paperback, and it's been on Kindle and Nook and so on all the time. I set a challenge to myself to begin with, and that was what made it fun. And the challenge was this: I thought, wouldn't it be fun? It's going to be an adventure. It's going to be a thriller as well as a mystery. Wouldn't it be fun to take an incident that occurs, some incident that occurs in 3 separate centuries, and tie them all together somehow? So I did that, and I started. The first century was the 15th century, and I started with an incident that occurred among the Aztecs. The Aztecs are the most fascinating group you can imagine. Have I got time for?
Yeah.
Okay.
9 minutes.
Okay.
Well,
Fair enough.
we can go a couple minutes beyond.
I'll speak quickly. The Aztecs, I found, boy, when I got into it, nobody know. I asked my friends, what do you know about the Aztecs? Well, all I know is the name. And we were wrong about that, because the Aztecs didn't use the word Aztec. They never heard the word Aztec. They called themselves Mexicos. Anyway, the Aztecs were a little tribe of about 200 people. They were little herders, gatherers, and so on in northern Mexico. Weakest tribe there, and their neighbors finally drove them out to take their land. They started a migration south that took them 200 years. But their high priest said, I got the word from our gods. I got the word. We are to set up a city where we find an eagle with a snake in its mouth standing on a cactus. When you see that, that's where. So 200 years later, they discovered a spot and they saw a cactus, eagle, the snake. By the way, that's in the center of the Mexican flag.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Anyway, so the difficult part of it was the whole thing was under 3 feet of water. So they had to fill all of that in, first of all. And then they were hit with a 2-year drought that killed, at least 60% of their people. So they're starting at a low level. But when they came out of that, they filled in their land. Now they start to build their city. And where they went from there is absolutely fascinating, and it was a combination of myth and fact that caused them to be what they were. And the fact was that they needed. Well, I'll start with the myth. The myth was that this is the 5th Earth that has been created by their gods, and they had more gods than they could count. But the gods created 5 Earths. The first 4 were destroyed. One was by a hurricane, a rain of fire, a windstorm, and the 4th Earth was destroyed when all of the humans were eaten by jaguars. Anyway, the gods got together and they created this 5th Earth. Now that's where we are, 5th Earth, and all of them were populated with humans. This 5th Earth was created when the gods were assembled around a fire. One of the gods sacrificed himself. Huitzilopochtli was his name, and he leaped into the fire, burned, and when he burned, he was transformed into this ball of fire, the sun. But he couldn't move. He had no strength. He had no energy. So the other gods set the pattern. The other gods, they sacrificed themselves to provide blood poured into the earth to feed Huitzilopochtli so that the sun would have the strength to give life to everything on earth. And the strength to be born every morning, do that arduous trek across the sky every day, and die every night, and then be reborn. Well, where does he get the strength? Here's the myth. The Mexican people realized through their chief priests the total responsibility is placed on us to provide enough blood, human blood, poured into the earth every single day to feed Huitzilopochtli so that the sun will stay. If we don't, we fail in that, the sun will die and then all of us will die. So where do we get the blood? From human sacrifice, right? Are we going to sacrifice our own? That's not such a hot thought because, we're going to run out of people for one thing. The chief priest said, how many people do you have to sacrifice for enough blood? Well, the chief priest would tell them, you have got to sacrifice one human being every 10 minutes. That's a lot of people. Where are we going to get them? So this little tribe all of a sudden became warlike, and they started capturing the tribes, going to war and capturing the tribes around them. And they would fight these flower wars, as they were called. And it was difficult for them to fight because while they're trying to keep as many captives alive for human sacrifice while they win, the enemy clearly is trying to kill every one of them. But they were tremendously successful. Jumping way ahead, they conquered 500 nations around them to the point where they ultimately ruled over 6 million people. Their reign extended from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from halfway down Mexico all the way down through Central America. Incredible. That was my first century. So I took an incident that occurred among the Aztecs. Now, second century. Come ahead 200 years. I've been fascinated with the pirates of the Caribbean. And the golden age of piracy was around 1650 to 1720. And I became more than fascinated with probably the greatest pirate that ever lived, and that was Captain Henry Morgan. Captain Henry Morgan accomplished feats that were absolutely impossible, leading other pirates to, and what they did was they preyed upon Spanish ships. Why is that valuable? Spain at the time had conquered all of the mainland of the United States, the mainland which was not the United States at that point, and the wealthy islands in the Caribbean. And what they were doing was they were mining the gold, taking the gold out of Mexico, sending it down to Panama City. They also conquered the Incas in Peru, where there's a mountain of silver, taking the silver, funneling it up to Panama City, then ship it over to the King of Spain, who used that fund literally to conquer 90% of Europe. He actually conquered 90% of the Europe because of that flood. Now, what was happening was the pirates, now independent, individual pirate ships with their own crews, they would raid these pirate ships, and ultimately, Henry Morgan conquered Panama City, which now shut down the flow of gold and silver to the King of Spain, and there went his kingdom. Only Henry Morgan he was a leader like George Washington. Only he could get the men to follow him through the hell that it took to conquer Panama City, because they had to trek through 50 miles of deadly mosquitoes, deadly snakes, and so on to get to the battle. That was the second century. The third century is the current century, focused on a group called the Maroons. This is a nation of escaped slaves that still exists in Jamaica. So putting those three together, and then turning it over to a group of five people who dig for treasure. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, 5 explorers who dig for treasure, and old pots and that sort of. 5 of them get together and they form a little group. They call themselves the Monkey's Paws. I'll tell you why in a second. And they go after the item that has been the result of the production through these 3 centuries. And they call themselves that because based on a short story that was written, short mystery story that was written by a man by the name of Jacobs in 1902, a magnificent story. It's called The Monkey's Paw. And the theme of that story is, be careful what you wish for. And it comes true as these explorers begin dying one way or another.
And then we got involved in a buried treasure.
We did.
We
Morgan's
didn't find
treasure.
it, but 10 years of it, friends of ours
That's right.
would get involved when they hear we were involved. And
That's
it
right.
was quite an operation
Yeah,
down in Panama City.
It was.
So, Jack, it's you and Lois.
Mm.
It's been fun having you.
Oh,
We're out of time, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
We an hour and a half. We were here. kicked
I
off
thought
at-
it was about 10 minutes, John. I've enjoyed it so much.
Well, yeah, we enjoyed having you. The next guest we will be having will be Pat Dugan, Judge Pat Dugan, who's that'll probably be you're going to be away for a while, right? No, for the next.
Just 1 week.
Yeah, 1 week. So it'll be in 2 weeks. Judge Pat Dugan, who's running for district attorney in Philadelphia as a Democrat against District Attorney Larry Krasner. But we'll get more of that later. But Jack, thank you. I hope
Thank you, John.
one of your stories gets to be a movie.
Thank you.
They're certainly movie worthy, and we'll meet up with each other again. This is John Ricciutti with Jill Frechie, and we are WXVU.org, streaming worldwide and on YouTube. So if you want to watch us, you can. We are on social media. If you have questions or comments, you can contact me at John, JOHN, RICCIUTTI. I take on any questions or concerns that you might have about our show. And until next time, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the music. Thank you.
Have you received a suspicious email from a professor or have been asked to communicate with them outside your Villanova email address? Have you been presented a job opportunity that requests you to purchase gift cards as a form of